Welcome everyone to our virtual small talk this evening. Small Talk Tuesdays and Small Talk evenings are casual and lively discussion with the Transcona Museum curators on topics related to the museum and the community of Transcona. We're excited to bring these to you virtually. Thank you for joining us. You are muted and your video has been turned off. So if you have a question or you want to communicate with us throughout the presentation, please use the chat function. The chat function can be found in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. If you can't hear us, make sure you have selected Join Audio. Feel free to ask questions throughout the talk. We'll get to as many as we can during the talk. If you post anything inappropriate in the chat, you will be removed from the meeting. You can leave the meeting at any time. However, we may lock it after about 20 minutes or so you may or may not be able to rejoin. And then we're also going to do a live question and answer period after the talk, using again the chat feature for questions that either we weren't able to get to or new ones. And when it comes to the live question and answer period, if you can't think of anything at the time or we finished our questions and then you think of something afterwards, please just email us or send us your question on social media and we will answer it as best as we can. And any questions we aren't able to answer, we will also research them and either write up a blog post or do some social media posts answering your questions. So this evening, my name is Alana and I'm the museum curator and I'll be leading the discussion. And behind the scenes today will be Jennifer, the assistant curator.
Hello.
So Jen will be taking care of the chat and letting people in and out of the into the meetings. So we both work at the Transcona Museum. I am also the co-chair of the Save 2747 committee with Peter Martin. So this evening's talk is all about the 2747. We would like to acknowledge that although we are meeting virtually, we are meeting on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. So we're going to start off our talk this evening with the history of the CN 2747. And the image that you can see on your screen, as best as we have been able to determine, this would be one of the very first images of the 2747. And we believe this photo of the 2747 was taken when the engine itself came off the manufacturing line. So it's really quite exciting to have such an early photograph of the engine. So a bit of a historical timeline. April 1926, it was built at the CN Transcona shops. It was the first steam locomotive built in Western Canada, and it was the very first one built at the Transcona shops. From the 1930s to the 1950s, it was used as a freight hauler. It worked in northern Manitoba, the Pas. 1960, it was retired after 34 years of service, and it was saved from demolition by the Kiwanis Club. In May of 1960, it was placed on permanent outdoor display in Kiwanis Park, which is now known as Rotary Heritage Park, or sometimes even referred to as Train Park, which is along Plessis Road. And in March 1981, ownership was transferred from the Kiwanis Club to the Midwestern Rail Association. So we actually don't know much about the life of the CN 2747, where it was used, what it did, who worked on it. We don't even have any photographs of it when it was in service. So we have been on the lookout for these stories and photos. So if you have any, or if you know of someone who has some, let us know so we can help fill out the history of the 2747. So in December of 2015, the Transcona Historical Museum acquired the engine for $1. Before we had ownership, there was talk of moving the engine to where the new Transcona library was being constructed. It was after that plan was scrapped that the museum pursued ownership of the engine. So in 2017, the Save 2747 campaign was launched, with funds raised going towards the restoration and preservation of the engine. May 2017, we hired GP Heritage Consulting. We contracted him to complete a condition report and assessment on the engine. So he had completed that by June of 2017 at a cost of just under $10,000. And he went over the engine inch by inch to let us know what needed to be repaired, how we could repair it, what pieces or materials we would need to repair it to ensure its longevity. In November 2017, a preliminary concept design for a protective enclosure was unveiled. This is just preliminary. It's our initial ideas of what we think we want the enclosure over the engine to look like, because the engine is not going anywhere. It is staying in Rotary Heritage Park. July 2018, preservation and restoration work began with a group of volunteers from the community. We also received land dedication grants from the City of Winnipeg. We received $10,000 for high priority repairs and $10,000 to cover the cost of that condition assessment we had. Part of that condition assessment, he broke down the work into high priority repairs, mid priority, and low priority repairs. So by completing the high priority repairs, we have helped extend the life of the engine at least 10 years if we do nothing. Basically, at the outset of that report, he did say, if we do nothing, this engine will have less than 10 years and it'll essentially be scrap metal. So we've been working very hard to complete all the high priority repairs. October 2018, our volunteer preservation crew had put in over 200 hours of work on the engine, and one of our volunteers actually worked on the engine when it was in service, and he has donated his CN workers card and provided us some information on the 2747, but he has been invaluable during this preservation project because he knows what the pieces are and how they were used and things like that. So it's pretty amazing that we have someone who actually worked on the engine as part of our volunteer crew. So May 2019, we received funding of $20,000 from the Winnipeg Foundation for the blast cleaning and repainting of the engine. This is to remove all old paint on the engine and provide new paint, and the new paint is a very, very strong paint that will actually provide a really good barrier against the elements, water particularly, which is very bad for the engine. Our volunteer crew continued going out on site. We held a fundraising barbecue to raise awareness and funds for the engine. And we actually met with CN to discuss possible involvement with our preservation project, because we are looking to CN to possibly be a major sponsor with this project. We've met with them. Our MP, Daniel Blakey, has met with them. And so they are aware of our project and what we're doing, and they are interested. And that's about as much as we know at the moment. August 2019, we had Kinetic Machine Limited contracted to complete welding repairs on the engine. We needed to complete all the welding repairs on the engine before we blast cleaned and repainted it. Otherwise, it didn't make, we needed to do it in that proper order. So Kinetic Machine came out and did all the welding repairs. So if you've driven by the engine recently, you'll see that there is some rust along the tender in various areas, and those are from those repairs. In September 2019, we received an additional $20,000 from the Building Sustainable Communities, a grant through the province of Manitoba. And we had Winnipeg Sandblasting contracted to complete the blast cleaning and repainting. And our MP, Daniel Blakely, took senior executive Sean Finn from CN on a tour around the 2747 during CN's 100th anniversary activities that were happening in the city. And in October, unfortunately, work had to shut down earlier than we anticipated due to bad weather. We had a really wet September, and then we had that very, very early snowfall in October, which essentially just stopped all work that we were doing. So the sandblasting company had tarped around the engine. They were preparing it. They were ready to do it. They wanted to do it, and the weather just did not cooperate. We also held a fundraising trivia night in support of the engine. So November 2019, we requested an extension from the provincial funding, and we had the support of our MLA, James Tietzma, in that request. As that part of that funding, we needed to have the work completed by March 31st, 2020. Now, because of the weather and the fact that the engine is outside and it's not in a building, there was no way we could do the blast cleaning and repainting in the middle of winter. So we asked for an extension of the funding. In March 2020, the extension was received from the province. Yay! So we have until March 31st, 2021 to complete the blast cleaning and repainting. And we heard that CN is still considering the partnership. So that's still a possibility in the future. April 2020, we're looking at developing an RFP for construction drawings of the shelter and better estimates of cost, because right now we just have a rendering. We have some costing that was done a couple of years ago, but we need really firm construction costs so we can move forward with that phase of the project, because once it's been blast cleaned and repainted, that is almost our next step of the major work that needs to go on. Our volunteer crew will still be going in and doing small repairs and small restoration and preservation, but the next big step of the project is that cover structure over the engine. And fingers crossed, November 2020 this year, we'll be able to hold a trivia night as well. Now, with the whole COVID-19 situation, I can't say at the moment that it's definitely going to happen, but fingers crossed we will be able to do so. So we have here on the screen some photos of actually the crew prepping Kiwanis Park to actually get the engine in there. So these were taken in March of 1960 in Kiwanis Park. So it wasn't just as simple as putting the steam locomotive in the park. There was a lot of work that needed to happen for it to go into the park. And part of that work that going in is there were a number of piles, cement piles that were placed underneath where the engine would sit. And that is to provide support, because that engine is very, very heavy. And if there weren't piles under the ground, it would have sunk by now. So these are photos of prepping the park for prepping for the piles and actually installing or pouring some of the cement for those piles. Now, to actually get the engine into the park, it wasn't brought in on a crane or on a truck or anything like that. They actually drove it into the park. So they laid down track, and that track came off the beach line that is right there on Plessis. They built a spur line that came off of that and essentially drove the engine in, turned it off, ripped up that extra track, and there you go, the engine is in the park. And so they turned it off and left it as it was. So these are some of the photos that we have of the engine in Kiwanis Park over the years. Now, I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of photographs of it when it was, or any photographs of it when it was in service. And we have very few photographs of it even when it was in Kiwanis Park and now Rotary Heritage Park. So again, we're always looking out for more photographs and stories. Initially, when it was placed in the park, there was no fence around the engine. But due to vandalism, and vandalism pretty much occurring almost as soon as it went in, a fence was placed around the engine, and there have been numerous fences around the engine over the years. And even when we are finished our project, there will continue to be a fence around it, just due to vandalism and theft and things like that. So this is a photo that we took of the 2747 right around the time that we gained ownership, that first spring that the museum had ownership of the 2747. So the question is, why are we working to preserve the CN 2747? The engine was the first steam engine built at the Transcona shops in April 1926. It was one of 33 steam locomotives built at the Transcona shops between 1926 and 1938. And the 2747 was the only one saved from being scrapped. Following 34 years of service, the locomotive was retired and donated by CN as a token of the dedication of the citizens of the town of Transcona. And it's a lasting testament to the workers of the Transcona shops and a reminder of the origins of the community. But this is also a significant piece of Canadian history. First steam locomotive built in the Western region, built in Transcona. So it's not only important for Transconians and Winnipeggers and Manitobans, but also Canadians.
So we have a question.
Okay.
Why was it numbered 2747?
And we got this question the last week when we did this as well. And as far as we know, it's just the manufacturing number essentially assigned to it. Correct, Jen?
Yep, just the next number in the line. There is a 2746, a 2748, and so forth.
Yep, ours is just the 2747.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned, it is without question a historically significant railway artifact that is worth preserving for current and future generations. It has tremendous potential for interpretive demonstrations and supervised visitor interaction. And as I mentioned earlier, it will be staying in its current location. We have no plans to move it. So starting in 2017, we have begun to offer behind the fence tours of the engine to interested visitors during special events only. Feedback from these events has been very positive and has increased the attention to the 2747. We also installed a Save 2747 banner on the fence to raise awareness. And I don't even think that banner was up a day when we started getting calls at the museum asking us, what are you doing and how can we help? So that has been very exciting, and obviously it works, and people also can visually see that something is happening here with this engine, and helping to raise awareness. In 2019, we had a Dine and Donate barbecue, and we were planning to have one this May, again, out at the engine, but it has been postponed again due to COVID and the situation and not knowing how things are going. We are hoping to still do one this year, potentially in the fall, but again, it just right now most things are up in the air. So its current condition, when you're walking by it or you're driving by it, it doesn't look like it's in that bad of shape. It looks pretty good. But over the years, the elements as well as vandalism have taken a toll on this majestic community treasure. So as I mentioned earlier, in May 2017, GP Heritage Consulting was contracted to complete a condition report and assessment of the engine. So that report contains the restoration recommendations and preservation needs of the historic engine, as well as projected cost estimates. And without immediate preservation work, the engine had an estimated lifespan of 8 to 10 years. So we By doing the work that we have done on it, and once we have completed the blast cleaning and repainted, we will have extended that lifespan significantly. And once we get a cover over that, even better. It will be available for future generations. So what work is needed? So the work includes, but is not limited to, minor repairs and cleaning, safety and security measures, sandblasting and painting of the exterior, procurement and fabrication of parts, installation of new materials, refinishing of small fittings, stabilizing rusted surfaces, weatherproofing, and a protective enclosure to minimize exposure to the elements. So what have we done so far since we've had it? So for the minor repairs and cleaning, we have replaced the rear bumper, the running boards. We have removed the cab floor, and that is to be replaced this summer. Replacement doors have gone onto the engine, and painting of some of the other wooden areas of the engine has been completed. For safety and security measures, we've installed signage on the fence, and we've installed a security gate into the cab, which was one of the recommendations from the report as well. The sandblasting and painting of the exterior, the engine was prepped by having all the welding repairs completed, and the sandblasting and repainting should be done by the summertime. Now, back for the 100th anniversary of the community of Transcona in 2012, CN actually did repaint the engine, but we were unable to determine what kind of paint was used. And when you get up close to the engine, in certain areas, the paint is peeling. So what the sandblasting is going to do is take all the paint off back to base metal. It will be primed, and then it will be repainted with a very, very strong paint that will not hopefully peel within a number of years. It's also a paint that we can go in and redo ourselves. It's not something that after this is done that we'd have to have the company come out again. This is paint that we could go and do touch-ups if we need to. By having it down to its base metal, we're removing any trapped rust or other elements in there that would cause the paint to fail over time. Procurement and fabrication of parts. Many of our volunteers are actually retired CN employees, so they have been using their connections to get parts for the engine, or actually using their skills and have fabricated new parts. So this is quite exciting. Just the level of knowledge of our volunteers is immense, and it's wonderful. Refinishing the small fittings. Some of our gauges have been refinished. There are others that will still need to be refinished, and there will be some that we will have to replace. Protective enclosure to minimize exposure to elements. So part of the coal tender, when the welders were out, we actually had them cover it with a big sheet of metal to stop rain and snow from getting into the coal tender, which will help reduce the amount of rust and degradation that is happening inside the coal tender. And then hopefully we'll have an RFP that will go out, and we'll get official drawings and pricings completed so that we can start looking at that next big step, which is the protective enclosure. So these are some before images. So when we got the engine, but before we started doing any of the work on it. So the photo on your left, you can see that peeling logo on there. So that's something that we'll have to redo the logos and get them put on. The photo on the right, some of those hoses aren't attached to anything anymore. That ladder that takes you up into the cab was very rickety, and it moved around a lot. You can see this here, this little bit, where if you can see my cursor, that was where some of the running boards were, and they were completely rotted. The running boards are over here as well. And can't really see it in this photo, but there was a big hole in the tender right here as well. So the photo on the left here, this is the rear bumper. So you can see the wood there and how it's rotted away. There would have been wood that those bolts would have been going through wood there. Some rotted wood right there. This is another piece up at the front of the engine. You can see holes that have rusted through that metal there. Excuse me. This is inside the cab, this photo on the left. So these are some of those dials. You can also see here, this is the roof of the cab. And here, this where you can see outside, those were actually where doors used to be, that were, it was completely open. There were no doors there anymore. And you can see the rust. This is from within the coal tender and obvious examples of vandalism. And we've heard many stories of young youths who have gone on to the engine to, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see me, but party. We found evidence what it made it look like someone may have been living in there over a winter, lots of materials shoved in holes and garbage and things like that. This is standing on top, the photo on the left, I'm standing on top of the water tender, and this is a hole, the metal has completely rusted through, a giant hole back there, and you can see how, if you can see my cursor moving there, just, it was failing metal, like almost paper thin. It was very dangerous to be up there. The photo on the right, again, is inside the cab. So there would have been doors here. There's windows on the side of the cab that are currently boarded up as well. They were originally glass. That glass broke. That was some of the early vandalism that happened when the engine first went into the park. So she's in a little bit of a rough state. And I'm going to refer to her as the engine as a she. So these are some of our during photos. So this is the bumper, the photo on the left, after all the rotten wood had been removed. The photo in the middle are two of our volunteers who are re-drilling holes for these bolts to put the new wooden bumper in. And the bumper was actually made up of two different pieces of wood that one of our volunteers sourced from CN that we were able to actually get for free. Pretty amazing. And the bolts, as you can see, they don't necessarily go in straight. So it was very tricky for the volunteers. It took them a while to really get all the holes drilled properly and in the right spots. And I believe even one of our volunteers had to create some new bolts and washers and things like that, because they had to cut some of them off when they were taking this all apart. And then the photo on the right here, this is our replaced rear bumper on the engine. Our first summer on of our volunteers working, the running boards were all replaced. So you can see our new running boards here, and we had a temporary door installed, and we now even have a different door that has been installed as well. It has some plexiglass. We've gone through some photos that we found, and some of them are even from the internet. They're not even from our own collection, to determine what those doors actually look like. And so in further photos that you'll see in the presentation, more of what those doors will actually look like when it's completely finished. So this is a photo of, again, the interior, the boiler. So these four dials here that you see my cursor going around are the exact same four dials here, after one of our volunteers had actually refinished them. So initially we thought that these weren't good anymore, that we would have to completely replace them. And so they were removed. He spent a lot of time cleaning them up, polishing them up. They needed replacement glass that he had fitted and like cut and fitted, and he replaced the hands. The hands were gone. And on all the dials, it says black hand this, white hand this, or black hand this, red hand this. So he went out and he got hands for them. So they just look amazing. when you compare before and after. Such great work. So you can imagine what this is going to look like when everything has been redone and it's shiny and refinished, and can't wait. It's going to be amazing. So for security, this is our security gate that we had installed. So it's to stop people from actually being able to go into the cab. Previously, there was nothing there. And I believe right now there's also a tarp attached to that from over the winter to stop snow from getting in as well. And this photo here, this was that section where there was completely that large hole where you could see into the water storage area. So this whole piece of wood, not wood, metal, was replaced by the welders. This is that sheet of metal that we had placed over the coal tender to stop water and snow from getting in. Along the sides here, there's some piping. Some of that was gone, so the welders replaced that, and they actually had to bend the pipe and make new fittings, and they did a lot of work for us. So it looks pretty good. And this is actually the two of the welding crew on site. So the tender here, so you can see here, this is where there were some large holes that had gone all the way through that they had to patch and repair. Again, along the bottom here and up here as well, there were some areas. And you can also see here that in some areas it's easy to see through the fence and some it's not. Last summer, our volunteers actually painted the outside of the fence black. And when it's painted black, your eye doesn't see it as much, and you can see the engine a lot better. So this has been painted, but up here, this hasn't been painted. And that was just something extra that our volunteers did, just to make it so you can view it easier as you're going by. This here, this side view here also shows that redesign of the door that I was talking about earlier. You can see that it was like a red door with a window in it, so that's been redone. And again here, that's some of that replacement piping up along the top of the tender there. And there was many places where this was just missing and gone. So volunteering today, so we have our volunteer crew, and they're probably itching to get out there right now, actually. At this time, we don't have any volunteers going out there just because of everything. But there are ways that you can help out. And actually this image here of the engine, this was painted by a member and a volunteer of the museum, and he gave it to us to use as a fundraiser. So we've actually created postcards of this original painting that we sell in our gift shop, as well as he gave us the original. So at some point, if we wanted to auction that off or anything we can do to raise funds, he gave us permission to use this image for that. And that's something that's quite special to have that as well. So to continue the restoration and preservation work on the 2747, we're seeking help from Transcona and the Winnipeg community. So we need, dedicated volunteers to assist with the work that happens on the engine. Now it is a bit of a smaller space and not many people can be out there at one time, but our volunteer coordinator last year, they went out twice a week, one day in the afternoon and then one day in the evening. So we're always trying to see what schedule would fit best for our volunteers who want to help out. We have determined that we won't have anyone working on the engine, that physical work on the engine, if they're under the age of 18. That's just a decision that we've made. But you can also, if there's donations of money, equipment, supplies, and time, that would significantly help. Spreading the word to other interested individuals would help our project today. So consider adding your name to our volunteer list, like once we get the okay to have our barbecue, if we're doing another big fundraising event, maybe you have the skills to help out with that, but you don't know like personally myself, I don't know many of the parts of the engine and what goes where and that kind of work, but you know, I can help out with fundraising and things like that. So there's many different ways many different people can help out on the engine. So a few fun facts about the 2747. It is the museum's largest and heaviest artifact. And it's so big, it wouldn't even fit in the building if we ever decided to move it, which we're not. It's staying in the park. It's technically not even located in Transcona. It's located in the Radisson riding, which is the provincial area designations for our MLAs. It's a 280 consolidation, so that means the wheels. So 2 leading wheels, 8 powered wheels, 0 trailing wheels. The total length is 69 feet 7 1/8 inch. Total weight is 394,160 pounds. The tender had the capacity of 16 tons of coal. And really interesting, fun little fact was when we opened up the coal auger doors, and we were requested to do this by GP Heritage Consulting for when he came out, we found that it was full of coal. Now you'll remember, they just drove the engine into the park, closed it up and left. So there was actually, the coal auger feeds coal into the engine. So that was full of coal from when they drove it into the park. So we actually have some of that coal at the museum. We saved it, and some of it is on display right now as well. So once the museum is able to reopen, you'll be able to come in and see some of that actual coal that was sitting in the engine. And we had no idea there was coal sitting in there until we opened up the coal auger doors. And this is our potential rendering of what we think we want the cover structure of the engine to look like. We want it to have a solid back wall. We want to design it in a way that if in the future we can completely enclose it, we'd have the ability to do so, but the initial design will be open. But we want to have that solid black wall to stop snow and rain and stuff from getting in the wintertime, sort of blocking a wind block a bit. But we can also put interpretive panels up there. We're thinking about, you know, a ramp so we can get up there when we're doing tours, having a space around it where if we're holding events, people can sit or do things on there. We're looking at not using, I'm going to say trellis, but that's the wrong word. Jen, what is it? It's the roof.
Oh, we don't want any like rafters or any like trusses or anything like that.
That's it, trusses, because that's where birds would roost. We want to have, we don't want trusses, so we want to. So we're thinking about, okay, how can we eliminate birds nesting above it and then depositing their deposits on the engine, which would require cleaning and stuff like that. You know, potentially looking at lighting from inside, or maybe even utilizing skylights, something like that. So it's still visible, it's still accessible, but again, that would all be under supervision. So now we're going to open it up. Does anyone else have any questions?
And so you can use the chat function.
And like I said earlier, if you don't have any questions now, but you think of one later, just email it to us or send it to us via social media, and we'll get it answered for you. If that's going to end up being a big blog post or just a comment on a social media post, we'll get it answered as best we can. There's some questions we've been asked during these talks that we've actually had to go back and do a bit of research on. So, and then some of them, the information is back at the museum. So once we're back at the museum, we'll be able to answer some of these.
So we have a few comments here.
Okay.
One, how much have we already raised towards the preservation of the engine?
Ooh. Well, I'm going to do some quick mental math in my head, and this will not, it's not super accurate, but so we got $10,000 from land dedication grants with the city, two of those, so that's 20,000, 20,000 from the Winnipeg Foundation, so it's 40, another 20 from the provincial government, that's 60. We've probably raised on our own about another 15 or so $1,000 with our fundraisers and sales of merchandise and something like that. So that's probably around 75,000 or so, but again, we've had expenses coming out as well during this process. The local Rotary Club, the Winnipeg Transcona Rotary Club, actually does have some funds for this project, because previously they had been raising money for the engine, and they have $30,000, but it can only go towards the roof structure. So once we actually start building that, we'll be getting those funds from the local Rotary Club, which will go towards the roof structure.
Some other comments. Great presentation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Another comment. It's sitting at about $45,000 for available future development.
Okay, and that's probably where it's sitting at this moment in time, but like I've said, we have had expenses that have gone out, so the total raised without including expenses, but I think that's currently what is sitting in the account.
How much will the total restoration cost?
Well, if we're factoring in the roof structure, and we had some early quotes now a couple years ago, and with construction, numbers change all the time, where it will probably be around, and this is why we're looking at that RFP to get construction costs and things like that. It's probably going to be anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 likely. And that's including the construction of the roof structure. Likely that's where we're estimating it will fall. I don't have a definite number for you yet because we don't have those hard numbers yet. Okay. So we do actually have a number of upcoming talks as well. We do talks Tuesday afternoons at 1 o'clock, and we also do these evening talks Wednesdays at 7 p.m. So the next couple of, we're just planning a month ahead of time. So for May on Tuesdays, we have how to care for your own heirlooms. Then we have history of the Transcona Museum, then the CN shops, and then communities that time forgot, Southwind and Monte Vista. And those were two communities within the borders of Transcona that no longer exist. And then Wednesdays, the Wednesday talks are about a week behind these talks. So we were starting with behind the scenes stories. That was the presentation that we gave yesterday afternoon. And then how to care for your heirlooms, the history of the Transcona Museum, and then ending with the CN shops. So we want to thank you for attending these talks today. These are free events, but we're asking you to also consider supporting the museum, so you can look at making a donation or becoming a museum member. If you're not already, donations can be made on our website through Canada Helps. We have a Canada Helps button, and you can actually purchase a museum membership right now on our website as well under the events tab. It's right there as well. Stay in touch. So, check out our website. We have a couple virtual exhibits on there. We have a link to our actual virtual exhibit, which is Serving King and Country, which is hosted on the Virtual Museum of Canada. We also have our Windows at 141 virtual exhibit up there. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We have our blog. Join our mailing list if you haven't already done so. Just support the museum in ways that you can. So once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, feel free to send those to us at a later time. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks again.
Bye.